Sky News has also verified footage and located Israeli troops in areas across the Strip. But in the south, the Rafah crossing has opened both ways for a third day, following weeks of diplomatic efforts. Nearly 100 British citizens were listed by the Palestinian Border Authority as being able to leave today, but it's not yet clear just how many crossed over. While the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who was in Tel Aviv today, said more than 100 aid trucks are going into Gaza every day. But today, an airstrike struck just outside the Al-Shifa hospital, where Israel said a Hamas cell had been using an ambulance. There are now concerns that a new front could be opening in northern Israel on the border with Lebanon, as a number of rockets were fired by Hezbollah. The group's leader gave a speech today pledging its support for Hamas. In a moment, we'll bring you a report from our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, who's in Beirut. But Mark Stone has our first report tonight, and a warning: it shows images of the casualties in Gaza.
Israel's battlefield is now the front entrance of Gaza's biggest hospital. Among the dead from their airstrike are women and children. We know that because we can see them in images that we could never broadcast. It is a horror and a hell that is hard to comprehend. According to Gaza's health ministry, a convoy of ambulances was trying to drive south, taking the wounded to Egypt when it was hit. 13 dead, they say, 26 injured. A doctor speaking to us from the hospital described the scene.
It's still chaos in the emergency department because there were so many bystanders. Nobody knows that part of it's the only gate into and out of Shifa, and it turned into a bit of a market there.
There was no denial from the Israelis. They did this, they say, because they had to, because they claim the ambulances were carrying terrorists. They have repeatedly said that Hamas is using the hospital as a base and that they have warned civilians to leave.
Hi, mister. Good to see you.
Just a few hours before the strike, a little over 100 miles to the north in Tel Aviv, America's top diplomat was back to meet Israel's prime minister. The two held private talks, where we're told the US Secretary of State did urge restraint. There was a meeting with Israel's war cabinet. And then a news conference, a reiteration of America's full support for Israel's war, and some words of caution.
As Israel conducts its campaign to defeat Hamas, how it does so matters. It matters because it's the right and lawful thing to do. It matters because failure to do so plays into the hands of Hamas and other terror groups.
And yet, for all that, the Israeli Prime Minister said they would continue with all their power. And listen to this from a key member of the war cabinet.
Everything that happens in Gaza right now is rightly connected both the great Hamas and release the hostages. All the rest are simply details.
But they're not details. There are lots of civilians dying. Thank you.
The details he talks about amount to a reported 10,000 dead now in Gaza. This is the coastal road in the Strip. It was the only route south still open. Reported Israeli shelling hit at least one car in a convoy. The images show children among the dead. And so, of course, now those in the north say they are too afraid to attempt the journey south. One British father, stuck with his 6 children in the Jabalia refugee camp, spoke to us by phone.
I can't take this, very critical and very risky decision to take my family and go there and, God forbidden, shell or being, killed by a tank or, no, I would rather prefer to wait.
The Israeli military is now deep inside Gaza and underground. Their own footage, we're told, shows Hamas tunnels they've discovered. And in Jabalia, where the refugee camp is, they say they uncovered detailed militant plans. And then there's this from the other side, from Hamas. This is a war that is being recorded from their helmets. For those who have managed to move south into the so-called evacuation zone, it is just the same. This is Khan Yunis, the place that is supposed to be safe. Men, women, bundles. And this is what fortunate looks like in Gaza. A young girl, revealed from the rubble. She is alive, but reciting her prayers, preparing to die. Mark Stone, Sky News, in Tel Aviv.
The Israeli military is on high alert in the north of the country too this evening after a series of rocket attacks coming from Lebanon last night. The leader of Hezbollah, the Iran-backed Lebanese group, reconfirmed its support for Hamas today, saying it would continue strikes on Israel, but stop short of announcing a war. And it's that broader escalation that is the concern of the international community. Sky's special correspondent Alex Crawford reports from Beirut.
There was a lot riding on this speech from the Hezbollah leader, and it wasn't just Lebanon waiting to hear what he said. They see Israel as the enemy and the bombardment of Gaza as a war crime, aided by America and the West.
I am worried about a war happening and people dying, but if this war is going to free Palestine from Israel and make Israel fade away, then yes, I guess I want a war to happen. If it's going to put us at peace, fine.
The head of Hezbollah is a divisive figure, but seen as a hero to his supporters. And he broadcast from a secret location on giant screens throughout Lebanon because of security concerns. His appearance was accompanied by war videos demonstrating Hezbollah's formidable military force, which is backed by Iran, like Hamas, and like Hamas considered a terrorist organization by several countries, including America and Britain. But it carries considerable clout in this region. Even in the countdown to his speech, there's been a marked escalation in violence, with Hezbollah mounting multiple strikes inside Israel, including using explosive drones. The Hezbollah leader warned there'd be more of the same, much more, much worse. He used his first speech since the October 7 Hamas attacks on Israel to warn America it needs to rein in the Israeli onslaught in Gaza, or there will be all-out war.
Fear that this could escalate or go into a full war or become a wider regional war is a realistic possibility, and it may happen.
Israel's already warned Hezbollah they'll get a response far bigger than these, which were part of the latest escalation, but rather one of unimaginable magnitude if it opens a second front. Hassan Nasrallah's supporters are fervent, though, lapping up his threats of war.
This is just what they wanted to hear, and they're celebrating wildly. They wanted to know that Lebanon was ready to fight to defend Gaza, that they are doing it, and it could get worse.
We love the people of Gaza, we love the people of Palestine, and we will stand with them in all the catastrophes they are suffering from. And we will fight in front of them, and we will not give up at all.
The Hezbollah supporters seem ready for war, even the very young. But the group's leader did distance Hezbollah and Iran from the Hamas attacks, saying they knew nothing about them. Despite much hype about Hezbollah declaring all-out war on Israel, this time there were no explicit plans, but plenty of threats. Enough, perhaps, to keep his supporters on side for now. Alex Crawford, Sky News in Beirut, Lebanon.
Our correspondent Cordelia Lynch joins me now from Jerusalem. And Cordelia, desperate attempts to calm the situation in the region today, but Israel showing no signs of pausing its attacks on Gaza.
That's right. It was the second visit from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, really trying to apply pressure on Israel, calling for a humanitarian pause. But he was rebuffed almost instantly from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, who made it clear there would be no pause, no ceasefire until all hostages are returned. And his rhetoric was fiery. He celebrated the Israeli soldiers who he said were killing terrorists around the clock. I think this is a problematic inflection point. I think you can see in the backroom talks, in the visits to the region, that the US are trying to influence, where possible, more space for Israel to make more space for critical aid to get through. There is a mounting and grim death toll. and a lot of international concern about the number of civilians dying. But Netanyahu has made very clear he is not going to change tack anytime soon.
Thank you. 92 British nationals were approved for travel out of Gaza into Egypt today. But as we've heard, it's proving difficult for many to move safely to the border. Sky News has spoken to a family in the UK who are desperately trying to get their family out of Gaza. But only some are on the list of those eligible to leave. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, reports.
Imagine this was your family's dilemma. Trapped in Gaza, pregnant Noor El Mokalalati and her children, all British, have permission to leave. Her husband doesn't. Ahmed is a doctor at the Shifa hospital, where they're all sheltering, where every day he sees the awful cost of this war and the deadly risk to civilians. Another strike outside the hospital today. The decision whether to send some of the family on a perilous journey, his brother says, has left them torn.
We did not receive a confirmation that his wife will be allowed to travel because she has a Palestinian passport, and we did not receive an assurance that they can move from northern Gaza to southern Gaza. So now Israel is stopping the movement from northern Gaza to southern Gaza, which is very scary.
Those with permission to escape the horrors of this conflict are now making their way through the Rafah crossing from Gaza into Egypt. Dozens of British nationals have been listed as eligible to cross. Faris Abu Wada has flown to Egypt to try to get his wife and 5 children out. All are on that list of Britons able to leave, but they're in northern Gaza, and when they try to head south, airstrikes force them back.
I'm demanding actually protection, a safe way to actually get transfer my children from northern of Gaza to Rafah border. That's only I ask the British government to do.
And the story of another family, young and old, stranded in Gaza, illustrates just how complex escape is. Of the 16 relatives of Dr. Ahmed Abu Foul and this heartbreaking situation.
One of my nephews is 4 months old. His name is on the evacuation list, but his mother is not. So that creates lots of trouble, because how would a 4-month-old travel through a lengthy journey through the Sinai Desert and all of that without his mother?
Those who are getting through include the parents-in-law of Scotland's First Minister.
Innocent men, women and children, including some of Nadia's family, like her brother who are still in Gaza, are suffering an unimaginable horror. And that's why, although my mother-in-law and father-in-law are safe and hopefully will be back here in Scotland very soon, we'll continue to raise our voice to call for that ceasefire. I think it's needed now more than ever before.
Foreign Office teams remain on the ground to help British nationals, but many are still waiting. In the most extreme of circumstances, the uncertainty of when, if, they'll make it to safety. Greg Milam, Sky News.
The Metropolitan Police have promised to crack down on lawbreakers at pro-Palestinian protests as the Prime Minister condemned plans for a march on Armistice Day as provocative and disrespectful. Tonight, protesters staged a sit-in at London's King's Cross station, despite police being issued with an order to prohibit the protest. Well, our political correspondent Tamara Cohen joins me now from Westminster, and that sit-in protest at King's Cross taking place tonight. I believe there have been a couple of arrests, but police being given new powers to crack down even further.
That's right. At King's Cross Station tonight, there were a couple of hundred people, perhaps several hundred, staging a sit-in, pro-Palestinian protesters with placards. Now, the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, had asked the British Transport Police not to let this go ahead on the grounds that it would be intimidating and disruptive to passengers. Now, it looks like it was disbanded a little while later, and 2 arrests were made of people at that protest. But certainly these protests are getting bigger and the concerns surrounding them are rising. Tomorrow we're going to see the fourth weekend of pro-Palestinian protests through London, although of course they've been in other cities too. But the Prime Minister is particularly concerned about the one taking place next weekend on the 11th of November, Armistice Day, when there'll be a 2-minute silence at the cenotaph and of course remembrance events later in the day. The Prime Minister has written to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Mark Rowley, saying that to plan protests on Armistice Day, as Palestinian campaigners have done, is provocative and disrespectful. And he said there's a clear and present risk that the cenotaph and other war memorials could be desecrated. He's asked the police to look at all their powers, including to ban certain areas or even ban the whole protest altogether if they want to police it robustly and make the public feel reassured. Now, Mark Rowley, the Met Commissioner, has replied to Rishi Sunak, saying that he does believe that these protests on Armistice Day will be policed robustly. We know the organisers, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and others, have said it is not their intention to go near the cenotaph, and they are planning it for later in the afternoon, a couple of hours after the 2 minutes silence. But certainly there is concern about the scenes that we could see on that day, given there have already been about 100 arrests at these protests over the last few weeks. We know that the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has called these protests hate marches, which has been widely criticised, and the Prime Minister has not repeated that language.
Tamara, thank you. Storm Ciarán has eased in the UK now, but bad weather is still forecast for the weekend. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for rain in the south of England from 5 a.m. tomorrow. In Jersey, there is a huge clean-up operation underway. The storm hit the Channel Islands and the south of England on Wednesday night into Thursday, bringing winds of up to 100 miles an hour. From there, Sky's Ashna Haranag reports.
The aftermath of the hurricane winds laid bare. Scores of homes scarred and shaken by the storm, and indoor sports courts now a mangled mess. On the ground, the twisted remnants of this playground mix with roof tiles and fences from neighbouring houses. Cars with punctured windscreens line houses with exposed roofs and collapsed walls.
It's like cut a swathe of destruction all the way across the island.
It's extraordinary, really, isn't it?
It is, really, yeah. It's incredible.
This is Roger's neighbourhood. He watched the storm head straight for him from his bedroom window.
I just saw this wall of debris come at the house, and it was like the sound of a jet engine, just a loud, deafening roar. And then the window started to break in front of me and smash, and I stood away from it, and I could just hear the whole house shaking, the roof lifting, all the cars getting smashed up. It was just a terrifying, 30 seconds, and I thought, that's it, we're all going to die.
Horror that's barely sunk in, and yet the clean-up has already begun. Some of the residents wonder where to start. This table tennis club has just marked their centenary anniversary, an achievement they now have nowhere to celebrate when the inside now looks like this. I mean, it's shocking from the outside, but having been inside, what's it like?
It's more shocking from the inside. Yes, it's carnage in there. We bought new tables fairly recently. It cost us £20,000. All the people who use the centre are devastated.
Financial support has been made available for locals and charities supporting them. Those struggling have leaned on the Salvation Army.
I really feel for our island because it's sad, it's really hard, and people just want to feel safe, and actually for some people they don't right now.
We're also really aware that a lot of people haven't got a warm, safe space, or perhaps they feel really anxious about being in their homes after a really difficult night.
A need that will only grow as the impact of this storm is felt for weeks and months to come, as this battered island refuses to be beaten. Ashna Haranag, Sky News in Jersey.
Storm Ciarán has also caused record-breaking rainfall in Italy, leaving 5 people dead. Residents in Tuscany and other northern areas were trapped in their homes, while hospitals were inundated and cars overturned. Tuscany's governor called the flooding without precedents. 12 people have died across Western Europe because of the storm. The murderer of law graduate Zara Alina has won a Court of Appeal bid to reduce the length of his jail sentence. Jordan McSweeney attacked 35-year-old Zara as she walked home from a night out in East London last summer. McSweeney was given a life sentence, but 3 judges have decided his 38-year minimum sentence was too low. He'll now serve at least 33 years. The music video for the Beatles' final song has been released. The track, Now and Then, was released yesterday and features all 4 Beatles. Now the music video, directed by 3-time Oscar winner Peter Jackson, has given fans unseen footage of the legendary band's early days. It's almost 2 weeks since the death of the football icon Sir Bobby Charlton, and his brother Tommy says he's been overwhelmed by tributes. In a TV exclusive, he's been telling Sky News about his last interactions with his brother. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris reports.
And very proud of that photo.
Pride is tinged with pain for Tommy Charlton, cherishing the memories of his family of footballing royalty as they mourn as a family.
I've never thought of Bob or Jack as anything but my brothers. And it's heartwarming to see the number of people, thousands of people, telling me that they respected Bob.
The outpouring of affection for Sir Bobby Charlton is comforting for Tommy, speaking to Sky News 2 weeks after his brother's death at 86 and 3 years after losing Jack. World Cup winning brothers. That glorious day in 1966, remembered so fondly by Tommy, watched not from Wembley, but just like most of England.
I didn't have any money to get there. Nobody in the family had that sort of money. And I didn't want to ask Bob or Jack to help me because they had far too much on their plate at the time, and that was just not the thing that I was willing to do. So I watched the match at home on the TV. Now I regret that. I should have made a bank loan or something to get there, but to me it was just my brothers playing another game.
Just as it was growing up in their Northumberland mining town.
We had uncles who were professional footballers, 4 uncles. And when they came home to Ashington, they would always bring us a football. So we always had, and people would knock on the door to see if we were coming out to play football because we always had a proper ball.
Bobby's talent took him to Manchester United as a 15-year-old, but never forgetting his roots while winning the League and European Cup.
Well, he had the gift. There is a certain it. It is there. It is part of a footballer's mentality, his psyche, his physical ability. He's got it in capital letters.
Dementia afflicted this family, attributed to the deaths of both Jack and Sir Bobby.
I remember the last time I spoke to him, we were on the telephone and he broke down and started crying. Well, I was crying. And his wife, after that, Norma, said it's probably best not to put Bob on the phone. So she kept us updated on how he was.
The family's grief has been shared with the football world, a very special family of World Cup winning brothers.
I was so proud of them, and I still am, that I choke up the fact that they're both dead, and they're very, very sad.
There will be a public celebration of Sir Bobby's life a week on Monday, with a procession through Manchester and a service at Manchester Cathedral, before a private family funeral. Rob Harris, Sky News.
Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder of the collapsed cryptocurrency exchange FTX, has been found guilty of defrauding customers of around $10 billion in what prosecutors described as one of the biggest frauds in US history. The 31-year-old faces decades in prison when he's sentenced in March. Here's our business correspondent, Adele Robinson.
He was the face of cryptocurrency, the so-called crypto king. Now Sam Bankman-Fried's downfall, with convictions for fraud and money laundering, becomes one of the most spectacular in finance history.
Anything you'd like to say?
The cryptocurrency industry might be new. The players like Sam Bankman-Fried might be new. But this kind of fraud, this kind of corruption is as old as time, and we have no patience for it.
The guilty verdicts came almost a year after the cryptocurrency exchange FTX that he founded collapsed. He's believed to have stolen at least $8 billion. Former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci was a business partner who lost $10 million.
I believe that this was malevolent and nefarious from day one. I don't think that this was something that tripped into it. I think he thought, as some of these people do think, they have these sort of savior or messiah complexes, that he was smarter than everybody else, and he could move the money over there. And of course, he would out-trade everybody in the marketplace, make tons of money, and then move the money back. I actually think that he thought that.
This is big. Bankman-Fried was a man who courted celebrities, helping to advertise the safest way to get into cryptocurrency.
It's FTX. It's a safe and easy way to get into crypto.
Yeah, I don't think so.
After founding FTX in 2019, 2 years on, he'd be worth over $26 billion. But in November last year, questions were raised about the solvency of his crypto hedge fund, Alameda Capital. That prompted a rush of customer withdrawals from FTX, which didn't have the money to cover them. FTX filed for bankruptcy 2 days later. And then in December 2022, Bankman-Fried was arrested at his home in the Bahamas and extradited to the US on fraud charges. What's happened in New York, those guilty verdicts will have repercussions worldwide in the cryptocurrency space. In a financial sector often seen as unruly, it will leave a large, possibly irreparable dent in investor confidence. It's already led to increased pressure by US authorities looking at more regulation.
It's fair to say that there is a need for regulation, but it does need to be proportionate. We don't want to completely kill off innovation. We're learning a lot along the way. We're seeing a lot of casualties along the way, but we're learning from that, and it's going to be a safer place over time.
Bankman-Fried now faces decades behind bars, the conclusion to what began as a remarkable tale of success, now a story of deception on a huge scale. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
The King and Queen ended their four-day state visit to Kenya today, meeting religious leaders at Mombasa Memorial Cathedral. The tour has been largely hailed as a success after a tense start when King Charles stopped short of an apology for abuses during British colonial rule, but called the violence abhorrent. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock has been travelling with the royal family.
The heavens had opened outside Mombasa Memorial Cathedral. So the King met faith leaders inside, a dialogue promoting peace, and in a world with religious tension and trouble, an important conversation.
Having the King in our midst is very much crowning. It's so encouraging. It's a big blessing. In that, it also gives us a forum to speak to the world on the various approaches and strategies we have to ensure that there is peace and harmony within our various communities.
Mombasa is a diverse city, Islam the second largest religion, and for that the King and Queen given a private tour of Mandri Mosque. This is a project the Queen wanted to see, helping victims of violence. In Kenya, 40% of women experience domestic abuse. The Situation Room is a safe space for them. If you're in Mombasa, this is the way to travel, taking a tuk-tuk. This one electric. And on to Fort Jesus, an ancient site and one of Kenya's most iconic monuments. The rain caused chaos at every step, but still a chance to celebrate traditional culture.
Well, Mombasa certainly brought the monsoon. Diplomats there were already hailing this trip a big success. I think the standout moment was the King's speech addressing historic colonial violence, stopping short of an apology, but much stronger than many had thought. Whether it went far enough, though, will be for others to decide.
There was always an added poignancy to this trip. Kenya, the place his mother became queen, and now the first Commonwealth country he visited as king. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Mombasa.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Guardian's Whitehall editor, Rowena Mason, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Brattett. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Express, their headline, "Hate marches are affront to British values." Stay with us for more on that and other stories. We'll be right back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. An ambulance has been hit by an airstrike outside a hospital in Gaza. The Israeli military says it was carrying Hamas terrorists. The clean-up after Storm Ciarán has begun as more weather warnings are issued for the south of England tomorrow. And in an exclusive interview with Sky News, Sir Bobby Charlton's brother Tommy has recalled growing up with future football legends. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with The Guardian's Whitehall editor, Rowena Mason, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boissing. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, Israel rules out ceasefire until hostages are freed, is the headline on the front page of The Guardian. The Express describes pro-Palestinian marches, which could take place on the weekend of Remembrance Sunday, as an affront to British values. The Times reports that Britain's chief rabbi is concerned about the possible protests. The Mirror is outraged at the shortening of the minimum sentence for the murderer of Zara Alina. Their headline, "No Justice." The Eye's headline tonight, election boost for Labour as former Tory Chancellor Ken Clarke backs Rachel Reeves. According to the Financial Times, a tumultuous time for the US economy could end in a soft landing after promising job numbers. The Daily Telegraph leads with a story about a crisis at the BBC over a reported £1.7 billion pension bill. The front page of The Sun carries a story about an apparent romance between Manchester United player Ruben Dias and the Love Island star Arabella Chi. And The Star tells us that 1 in 5 people who suffer from hair loss have anxiety about it. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Rowena Mason and Anita Boateng. Welcome again to both of you. Let's start with The Guardian and the Israel-Gaza war. The diplomatic attempts that have been made, and several attempts we know by Antony Blinken. He's flown out to Israel more than a couple of times. He's been in the Middle East. The request for a ceasefire or humanitarian pause is fallen on deaf ears.
That's right, and we've heard today that Israel has ruled out this request for a ceasefire until the hostages that are being held still by Hamas are freed. That shows Israel going further in its response to this appalling massacre that happened than some of its international allies would have wanted at this stage. So it's increasingly out on a limb where the US and the UK have been saying that now is the time for some humanitarian pauses in order to try and address the humanitarian crisis that's happening in Gaza. And even longer ago, the EU and some other countries have been calling more strongly for that. So Israel's been incredibly firm about this. It's got its military plan. It's gone into Gaza, and it's saying that this will continue to happen until the hostages are freed.
Yeah, so Benjamin Netanyahu doubling down, in effect, Anita, and saying that the offensive will continue with full force.
Yes, and we have seen a lot of kind of fiery rhetoric from Netanyahu and others in his cabinet, his war cabinet, as the response to the 7th of October continues to reverberate around Israel. One thing that's really interesting is this language around ceasefire versus humanitarian pause, and I think it is an important distinction. So a ceasefire would basically require, of course, both sides to obey that, and let's not forget that, you know, Israel, it would require Hamas to agree to a ceasefire, and I can't quite see what the incentive would be there, not least Hezbollah as well, who are also very active in the area. We may talk about their role in this conflict too. So that looks like it's quite far away. And what Blinken and other, Israeli allies want is for a pause specifically for the allowing of aid to come into the country. And the fear from the Israeli perspective is that if you cease fire, then there's an opportunity for hostages to be moved. It'll be difficult for them to be found in due course. So this is a very tricky line that I think Israel's allies are trying to walk, which is to keep it very firmly focused on aid, bearing in mind some of the difficulties of urban warfare in and of itself, let alone trying to extricate hostages from effectively tunnels beneath a very highly populated city.
Yes, and the Israeli worry is that it could allow Hamas time to regroup. Yes. And double down on their efforts. Let's have a look at the Express and bringing the story back to the UK. And the quotes that we're hearing coming from Rishi Sunak, that he wants to see planned protests on Armistice Day banned. Why so, Rowena?
He's saying the language he's using is that a large pro-Palestinian march would be provocative and disrespectful on the weekend of Remembrance Sunday. I think he's treading quite a careful line. I'm not sure he's quite gone so far as to specifically say it should be banned. His aides are suggesting that he'd rather it didn't go ahead, but what he's doing is he's pointing out to the Met Police that they have powers in extreme circumstances to prohibit or put very severe restrictions on marches. That's done only in quite unusual circumstances. He's questioning whether this is potentially one of them. And the Met have got an incredibly difficult situation here. They're trying to tread a fine line between allowing people freedom of speech and the right to protest and trying to protect people who feel under threat as a result of some of the fringe elements of these protests that have veered into offences. So it seems at the moment like some sort of marches will be allowed to go ahead, and I think there's a dialogue about how close to potential remembrance services it will be and whether it will be at a different time. But even so, there's worries about whether there could be spillovers from the march that don't potentially abide by the parameters that the organisers of the marches have set out.
And concerns that marches could disrupt the 2-minute silence commemorating the war dead. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has gone even further, describing the planned protest as a hate march.
Yes, and I presume she's sort of referencing that quite a lot of these protests that have taken place have seen, people talking about jihad. We've heard, from the river to the sea. We've heard talk of an intifada against Israel. There has been some very provocative and some anti-Semitic posters and activity that's gone on in and around these marches. And I think that the next story we'll go on to talk about really is in the Times, and that's really the chief rabbi talking about the ways in which these marches have, impacted the psyche of many people, many Jewish people in the country, and that feeling of being under threat and under pressure. And I certainly think that, we do want there to be a healthy protest and debate in this country, but it certainly surprised me and shocked me to see some of the language that we've seen around some of these protests. And of course, many people have protested very, very peacefully, but these demonstrations are certainly something that have caused some distress to members of the Jewish community.
It is a very tricky line, as you say, Rowena, because the majority of the people on the marches are calling for a ceasefire or some sort of peaceful resolution, which is their right to do.
Yeah, and people can go out and protest on any issue, and this is an issue in which some people feel incredibly strongly about, and we've seen it in these absolutely huge marches since the beginning of the war, and emotions are just running incredibly high, which is why it's so difficult for organisers of the march to kind of keep everything under control. And we have seen, very small elements of the marches grow out of control. So this is why I think Rishi Sunak's written to Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of the Met, urging him to make robust use of his powers, and why we've got this warning in the Times here from the Chief Rabbi, Ephraim Mervis, who's saying it's a stain on our common humanity that so many seem to have lost sight between the moral distance between Hamas and Israel.
Yes, poignant words. The Telegraph, we have a quick look at that. They're also talking about the potential march on Armistice Day, but suggesting that Gary Lineker has sparked a new political row because he's backing the pro-Palestinian protesters planning to march on that day. So Gary Lineker not being shy and retiring after previous exploits.
Hold the front page. Gary Lineker is pushing back against the Home Secretary in this instance and does not agree with the government of the present day. So, it's worth reading the quote in full. He says on X, formerly Twitter, do we have to do that now? I think we do. Yeah. Saying, marching and calling for a ceasefire and peace so that more innocent children don't get killed is not really the definition of a hate march. So he's pushing back against what Suella Braverman has said. And the Telegraph has a kind of decent sort of run through both of Braverman's position, but also some of the instances that have taken place during some of the marches that have happened since the 7th of October, which have included, I'm afraid to say, anti-Semitic placards, calls for jihad, and other sort of things that are kind of deeply distressing. And so it is one of those incredibly difficult lines to walk, I think, for the Met Police in particular, in wanting there to be a protest, wanting there to be kind of peaceful activity, but also concerns that if we see any activity that could, affect the Senate half, and that area obviously gets kind of cleaned and prepared for what is going to be a very sombre day on the 12th. Will Armistice Day on the 11th possibly spill over into that 12th? And that would be quite a sad thing, I think, for Britain.
And just to say, there have been 2 arrests at King's Cross Station in London tonight, that after the sit-in there, and the Transport Secretary banned that because of risk to train services. We are going to take a break now, Rowena and Anita. Thank you very much for the moment. Coming up, the Home Secretary wants to restrict the use of tents by rough sleepers. But is that the right way to address homelessness? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is essentially the epicenter of the epicenter. It's the Haiju district. The message from China is clear. This is a modernized military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed.
This is a routine exercise. It's defensive in nature.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Rowena Mason and Anita Boateng. We're going to take a look at the FT story on the front page, and this is Suella Braverman in the headlines again. She's wanting to curb the use of tents by homeless people on the streets. Anita, take us into this story.
Yes, so there is speculation that in the King's Speech, which is the legislative programme we're expecting to be outlined next week, that there is going to be some kind of legislation around a ban on tents in urban areas. And this is a really a sort of fascinating policy area where instinctively you might think, why would you not want to give someone who's homeless a tent? But there is some interesting sort of evidence coming out from different councils of different guidance where they have found they can be you can have lots of criminal activity like sexual assaults take place and there's not as much visibility. It's difficult to check on people's welfare. And there are some instances where it kind of makes it difficult to sort of access support because you kind of allow sort of more long-term sleeping outdoors. So it's quite a complex policy area, and I hope that if the government decides to kind of move in this direction, that they provide adequate kind of guidance and really explain the rationale behind a ban on tents, if that's what ends up happening.
And Marina, the Home Secretary is also including in her proposals a new civil offence to deter charities from giving tents to the homeless as well.
I mean, on the face of it, it does seem a very divisive thing to be doing. You know, obviously we'd all love people who are homeless to have somewhere to stay indoors for the night and for them to be helped off the streets in the first place. But you know, given that many people will be out there and for whatever reason won't be accommodated indoors, it just, you know, surely it's better to have them in a tent than half freezing, and especially going into the winter months. It's you know, it's sort of, even though there might be arguments for why you wouldn't necessarily encourage tents as an option, the idea of deterring charities with fines seems like a very harsh and not particularly humane way forward.
It does seem harsh, but I take on board the points that you raised, Anita. Just quickly, we've got about a minute, I think, just to talk about Ken Clarke endorsing, guess who, Rachel Reeves for Chancellor. Well, is he crossing the floor?
It's not clear that he sort of endorsed her. He said that she's reassuring and responsible, which, you know, I'm not quite sure he sort of praised her rather than saying, I think she should be the next Chancellor.
Well, reassuring and responsible figure to run the UK economy.
I mean, I agree with Anita. He's stopped short of actually saying he wants Labour to win the election. He went on to say it's her party that worries me. Although then he did say that both, he said he wouldn't be particularly worried if either Jeremy Hunt or Rachel Reeves was the Chancellor, sort of implying some degree of him not really minding so much who it was. So, I mean, although he doesn't go the full hog and say, you know, he'd prefer her out of everybody, it is another sort of endorsement for Rachel Reeves as being somebody who's responsible. She had Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, come out behind her previously. It's more sort of it's more material for her image as this kind of iron chancellor. That's how she wants to be portrayed.
Boost definitely to her confidence. Rowena, Anita, thank you very much. We'll hear more from you in the 11 hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, there is more rain to come this weekend. Not great news for those still recovering from Storm Ciarán, but Sunday looks a little more promising with brighter spells. It will be a wet start across much of Ireland, South Wales and southern England as overnight rain pushes up from the southwest, accompanied by strengthening winds. Further north, it'll be drier but chilly with some fog patches. Overnight fog will lift to bright spells and just a few showers for Scotland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11, an ambulance convoy is hit by an airstrike in Gaza with reports of casualties. The Israeli military says it was carrying terrorists.